The road narrowed the closer Daniel Cross drove toward Graymark Cove. What had started as a two-lane highway faded into a cracked strip of pavement that clung to the cliffside like an afterthought. His headlights swept over jagged rock formations and twisted trees bent permanently inland from years of salt-heavy gales. Below, the sea surged and thundered, white foam glowing faintly in the moonlight. Daniel gripped the wheel tighter. The weather report had promised light coastal rain, but the sky above him was a bruised patchwork of clouds. Each gust rattled his old truck. Each turn threatened to send him skidding into the abyss. Still, he pressed on. He had driven nearly 1,000 miles for this. The Graymark Lighthouse, abandoned for half a century, was a legend among paranormal researchers, though few ever dared get close. The stories varied. Lights shining from the lantern room long after it was decommissioned, phantom ships seen offshore signaling distress, voices carried on the wind calling sailors by name. Locals insisted it wasn't just haunted, it was hungry. It took those who lingered too long, and the missing persons reports in nearby counties were enough to make the legend stick. Daniel wasn't a skeptic, exactly. He had seen enough strange things in his travels to keep an open mind, but he also knew people loved stories more than facts, and his job, his obsession, was to sort one from the other. By the time he reached the town of Graymark itself, rain was misting down in thin silver sheets. The town was small, more a cluster of buildings around a weather-beaten dock than a true settlement. Street lamps buzzed faintly in the damp air. Most windows were dark, curtains drawn tight. Daniel parked outside the only building that looked alive, the Salt Hook Tavern. A wooden sign creaked on rusted chains, and the windows glowed faintly with orange light. Inside, the tavern was quiet but not empty. A handful of fishermen hunched over drinks, their faces ruddy from weather and wear. The air smelled of wet coats, fried fish, and the sour tang of spilled beer. The jukebox in the corner stood unplugged, silent as a coffin. Daniel stepped inside, shaking off his jacket. He could feel every eye turn his way. Outsiders weren't common here. That much was clear. The bartender, a broad-shouldered woman with a braid of gray hair, wiped a glass and spoke first. "Storm's a nasty one tonight." "You look like you came a long way." "Yeah," Daniel replied, offering a polite smile. "I'm headed up the coast. Thought I'd stop for a drink first." She raised a brow. "Up the coast?" "Nothing up there but the cliffs." Daniel hesitated, then decided to lean into it. "I'm actually here to see the lighthouse." The room went still. One of the men at the bar coughed into his drink. Another muttered something under his breath. The bartender's rag stilled against the glass. "Graymark Lighthouse?" she asked slowly. Daniel nodded. "I'm a documentarian. I record places like that, old ruins, haunted sites. I'm not here to cause trouble, just document the history." The woman leaned in, her voice low. "History's not what waits out there." From the end of the bar, a man spoke up. His face was a map of creases, his beard salt and pepper, his eyes bloodshot but sharp. He had the look of someone who'd spent more years at sea than on land. "You'll find bones in the rocks, son. Bones, and worse. You stay the night in Graymark, you'll hear it, calling. Same as the keepers did. Same as the ships that never made it back." Daniel tried to keep his expression neutral. "And you've heard it?" The old sailor stared into his drink. "Once. That was enough." Another voice, younger, came from a table in the corner. "They say the lighthouse ain't a warning for ships." It's a prison, built to keep something locked inside. The bartender snapped at him. "That's enough, Cole." Then she looked back at Daniel, her expression firm. "You want a story? You got one. But if you're smart, you'll drive back the way you came before dawn." Daniel gave a thin smile. "I've never been very good at doing the smart thing." No one laughed. When he finished his drink and stepped back into the rain, he felt the stairs following him until the tavern door creaked shut. Daniel's hands trembled as he clicked off the recorder. The whisper still crawled across his thoughts, twisting itself into the sound of the waves. He forced a laugh, shaky and thin. "It's interference, that's all. Radio bleed, a trick of the storm." But he didn't quite believe it. Back in the keeper's quarters, he unpacked his gear with forced precision. Cameras, tripod, infrared thermometer, spare batteries, even a small EMF meter he used more for atmosphere than hard science. He arranged everything neatly on the desk beside the logbook, as though organization could ward off dread. He began filming his initial walkthrough. Graymark Lighthouse, keeper's quarters. Condition suggests abrupt abandonment, personal effects left in place, food tins still stacked on shelves, journal entries unfinished. No signs of forced entry. First unexplained occurrence, audible knocks and apparent whisper phenomena on recording equipment. Further observation required. His voice sounded steadier through the camera than it felt in his chest. Outside, the storm deepened. Wind howled through cracks in the glass panes above, and rain lashed against the stone like fists. The lighthouse moaned with the weight of it, timbers flexing as though something larger than wind pressed against its walls. Daniel set his first static camera on the stairwell landing, angled downward to capture the door in the first few spirals of stairs. He set another to cover the keeper's quarters, lens fixed on the cot and desk. He spoke to each one as he turned them on, noting times and conditions, slipping into the careful tone of documentation that had carried him through dozens of abandoned churches, mines, and farmhouses before. But never had one felt like this. By 11 p.m., he was sitting cross-legged on the cot, headphones on, monitoring his live feed. His handheld mic sat in his lap, red light blinking. For 20 minutes, there was only the storm. Then, the first anomaly appeared. Static cracked across the line, though the feed showed nothing. The EMF meter on the desk flickered once, twice, then spiked into the red before dropping back to zero. Daniel sat forward, voice tight but professional. 11:23 p.m., significant electromagnetic fluctuation, brief static interference. No external cause identified. Then, the stairwell camera chimed. Movement detection triggered. Daniel's heart leapt as he switched feeds. The grainy image showed shadows shifting along the lower stairs. For a moment, he thought it was the beam of his own flashlight bouncing, but he hadn't moved. The shadow was climbing, step by step. He grabbed his recorder. 11:27 p.m. Visual anomaly. Apparent shadow form ascending stairwell. Investigating. When he crept to the landing, his own camera lens reflected back at him in the gloom. The stairs below were empty. Only the hollow groan of stone under storm echoed up at him. But his camera feed told a different story. On the playback, the shadow was still there, still climbing, though nothing visible to the eye. And worse, with each frame, it looked less like a shadow and more like a person. Shoulders bent beneath weight, lantern in hand, moving at a pace too deliberate for tricks of the light. Daniel slammed the recorder off. His breath came ragged, the air in his lungs tight as if the whole lighthouse were pressing in. He backed into the keeper's quarters, shut the door, and turned both cameras toward it like weapons. Minutes bled into hours. At 2 a.m., exhaustion dulled his panic. He leaned back against the wall, fighting sleep, telling himself this was just like the mines in Arizona, the asylum in Pennsylvania. Shadows, echoes, nothing more. But then came the knocking again. 3 raps, slow, deliberate. Only this time, it wasn't from below. It came from the wall behind him. Daniel bolted upright. His flashlight beam swept the stone, dust motes spinning in the air. The knocks came again, softer now, moving. From the wall to the ceiling, from the ceiling to the stairwell door. And then silence. Daniel pressed the recorder to his lips, whispering. 2:04 a.m. Phenomenon escalating. Sounds traveling within stone structure. No visible cause. He listened again, holding his breath. The silence stretched, thin and tight, until he thought it might snap. Then his laptop pinged, an alert from the stairwell camera. Motion detected. He flicked the feed on and saw himself, his own image walking down the stairs, flashlight in hand. But he was here, in the room, staring at the screen. His double paused on the second landing, turned toward the camera lens and smiled. Then the feed cut to static. Daniel staggered back, the chair clattering to the floor. His throat closed, a tight panic climbing his chest. He tore the headphones off, shaking his head. It's a glitch, feedback, loop from earlier footage. His words tumbled, desperate for logic, but deep down he knew. The figure had smiled. He hadn't. By dawn, his nerves were raw. He hadn't slept, hadn't even closed his eyes. The storm had passed, leaving the air heavy with mist. Daniel shut off his cameras and collected his equipment, every click of plastic against metal a small relief. The lighthouse was silent now, unnervingly so. He told himself he'd review the footage later with fresh eyes. Maybe it wouldn't look as damning in daylight. Maybe it would make sense. But when he bent to pick up his gear by the cot, he saw something that hadn't been there before. The logbook on the desk was open again, a page he hadn't touched. The ink was fresh, glistening faintly in the morning light. A new line written beneath the last abandoned entry from 1963. Another has taken the post. Daniel staggered back, breath catching in his throat. The ink wasn't smudged by damp, not aged by time. Someone or something had written it overnight, and the handwriting matched his own. Daylight softened the lighthouse, but Daniel knew it was a lie. The line in the logbook from last night still glistened in his thoughts. Another has taken the post. He tried convincing himself it was a prank of fatigue, but the handwriting was his own. Exploring in the gray morning light, Daniel found a hidden journal wedged behind old gear near the lantern room. The leather was swollen with damp, clasp rusted green. Inside, neat entries bore the name Alden Pike, Keeper, 1962. The first weeks read mundane: weather, tides, supplies. Then, subtle shifts. Notes about scratching in the walls spelling Thomas. Fog that whispered vowels too long. Condensation on glass forming spirals. Pike wrote of footsteps on the stairs when no one was there, of lanterns found burning on rocks where men had vanished, of voices in surf calling his name. The tone darkened. By February, the entries came daily, frantic. The flame resists me, as if another hand owns the wick. Jonah says the light is a lid on a jar. We are the lid. Thomas is gone. His lantern still burned. I met myself on the stairs. He smiled. His sleeve was wet with brine. Sketches filled the margins, spirals tight and endless, dots that looked like counting. Dates overlapped with the unfinished log Daniel had found the night before. The final entries chilled him. March 19th. Something walks the stairs after dark. None of us go to the lantern room anymore. March 22nd. I will keep. I will keep. I will keep. March 23rd. They are in the walls. They want me to. The words ended mid-stroke. Ink blotched like a pen ripped from the page. As Daniel read, the lighthouse seemed to lean in. Fog pressed heavy outside, muffling the sea. He filmed the journal for his records, but his voice shook. Journal suggests the lighthouse isn't just a beacon. It's a barrier. Something beneath is. He cut himself off, throat dry. A noise rose from below. Not storm, not wind. Footsteps. 4 slow, measured steps, pausing, then 4 more. Daniel's pulse hammered. He leaned toward the stairwell, flashlight trembling. For a breathless moment, he saw him. A figure in an old peacoat, lantern dangling from his hand, water dripping from his chest downward, as if he had waded in up to his heart. His face was Daniel's, older, salt-scoured. The figure tilted its head, smiled faintly, and mouthed a word Daniel couldn't hear. Then it blurred, dissolved into shadow, and was gone. Daniel stumbled back into the keeper's quarters, heart in his throat. His camera captured him trembling by the door, whispering, "I'm not the keeper." But the lighthouse disagreed. Above, the lantern room clicked. The long dead lamp flared with light, golden and steady, as if it had always burned. The hum of its glow filled the tower like breath in a chest. Outside, through the fogged glass, lights began to move along the rocks. Dozens, perfectly synchronized, climbing toward the lighthouse in eerie unison. Daniel froze, recorder in hand. His whisper bled into the static. The light. It isn't a warning. It's a lid, and something underneath is trying to get out. From the wall behind him, 3 polite knocks answered. By the time the lamp bloomed to full strength, Daniel could barely breathe. The lantern room hummed with a low vibration that worked its way into the stone, into his teeth. The light wasn't warm like fire. It was sharp, metallic, almost surgical. He hadn't touched the wick, hadn't struck a match, yet the Fresnel lens blazed like it was drawing power from something deeper than oil or flame. He tried to rationalize. Residual charge? Some kind of automatic mechanism? But even in the moment, the excuses felt ridiculous. The lamp hadn't been maintained in 50 years. It shouldn't even exist in working order. Outside the tall windows, fog smothered the cliffs, thick as poured cement. But where the beam cut across it, Daniel saw them. Figures. Dozens. At first he thought they carried lanterns, but as the fog shifted, he realized the lights were their faces, pale and faintly glowing, features blurred as if pressed against frosted glass. They moved in unison across the rocks below, climbing toward the base of the lighthouse. Daniel scrambled for his camera, zoomed in, and nearly dropped it. Their bodies were wrong. Too thin, too elongated, arms swinging with insect precision. And yet their steps were measured, human-like. Every few seconds they all turned their heads in unison, looking up at him in the lantern room. He felt their gaze even through glass, through fog. The longer he looked, the more his mind insisted they weren't strangers at all. They were familiar. Faces from town, from the tavern, the bartender, the old sailor, the young man in the corner. Their features slid across these glowing masks like water, one identity dissolving into another. The fog shifted again. Their faces were his. Dozens of Daniels climbing the rocks, pale and hollow-eyed. Daniel staggered back from the window, bile rising in his throat. He switched on his recorder with shaking fingers. 12:47 a.m., outside the structure, multiple entities, light reactive, appearing human, though distorted, mimicking me. From below came the sound of boots on stone, not his imagination this time. The stairwell camera chimed with movement. On the feed, shadows rose up the steps. 1, then 3, then 10. No physical forms visible, just darkness moving against the direction of his light, climbing in steady rhythm. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and flung the door open. The stairwell was empty, only the damp smell of stone and rust. Yet the feed showed otherwise, dozens of shadows filling the tower, pressing upward, shouldering into the lens like they would burst through the screen. And layered over the feed was a sound he hadn't heard before. Not whispers, not knocks. A language, low, guttural, woven with his own name in every phrase. Words he didn't know but somehow understood. Keeper, keeper, keeper. The journal's last line echoed in his mind. They are in the walls. They want me to. He slammed the door shut and backed into the room, breath ragged. The light from above poured down the spiral like liquid gold, but it wasn't illumination. It felt like containment cracking, bleeding at the seams. A sudden bang rattled the base of the lighthouse. The whole structure shook, dust sifting down from the rafters. The entities had reached the door. He didn't need to look. He could feel them pressing against it, testing the iron like fingertips against skin. Daniel ran to the window, desperate for an escape route. Fog pressed against the glass so thick it was like staring into milk. Yet shapes loomed within it, statuesque figures just beyond clarity, watching, waiting. One stepped close enough that the fog peeled back around its face, and he saw his own features, mouth stretched into a smile too wide to belong to him. His recorder was still running. His voice cracked as he spoke into it. The light isn't a warning for ships. It's a cage. The keepers weren't watching the sea. They were keeping something in. From the stairwell, the knocking returned, faster now, insistent. Not 3 beats, but dozens, in rhythm with his own pulse. The walls quivered with it as though the stone were a drumskin. Daniel's camera, still running on the desk, caught the moment the fog outside rippled like water struck by a stone. The glowing figures froze, tilted their heads in eerie unison, then began climbing again, this time not up the rocks but directly into the fog itself, as if the air had solid rungs. They were coming for the glass, for the lantern room, for him.
The lighthouse groaned. The beam of light sputtered, flared, then burned brighter, as though straining against the pressure of whatever pressed from outside. Daniel whispered, "It can't hold forever." And the moment he said it, the knocking stopped. Which was worse than the noise, because silence meant listening. The silence after the knocking pressed harder than sound. Daniel stood in the keeper's quarters, heart hammering, afraid to breathe too loud in case the lighthouse itself was listening. His eyes landed on the journal again, the last unfinished entry,
the words stopping right before, "They want me to." It felt like a command, hanging unfinished in the air, waiting for him to finish it. The lamp above still blazed, humming through the stone, but the hum wasn't steady anymore. It pulsed like a heartbeat not his own. Daniel forced himself to move. He gathered his recorder and camera and aimed for the stairwell, hoping to flee the tower altogether, even if it meant stumbling blind into the fog. But on the landing just below the quarters, his light caught something he'd missed before. A hatch, rust red, bolted into the wall just above the floorboards, half hidden behind stacked crates. The metal surface was slick with condensation, edges crusted with salt. He knelt, wiped it with his sleeve. The journal had mentioned a hatch, the one Jonah had gone through. His chest tightened. The journal had also warned not to, but the air around the hatch was colder, almost breathing out against his skin. He switched on his recorder. 1:19 a.m. Discovered substructure beneath lighthouse. Possible maintenance access. Proceeding. The latch groaned as he pulled it. The sound echoed like it was traveling down a throat. A wave of air washed over him, damp, metallic, sharp with rot. The stairwell behind him seemed to lean closer, as if the lighthouse itself were holding its breath. He climbed down. The ladder led to a narrow passage carved into the rock. The walls were wet, gleaming like the inside of something alive. Salt crystals clung to crevices, but deeper in, the glimmer changed, darker streaks that looked like dried blood. Daniel's flashlight beam jittered as he moved. The tunnel sloped downward, each step sucking at his boots. The sound of waves grew louder, though he knew the tide couldn't reach this deep. The journal's words repeated in his head. "If you go down, it will be fewer steps when it comes up." The tunnel widened suddenly into a chamber. His breath fogged the beam as he swept it across the space. Statues, dozens of them, standing waist-deep in black water. Men carved from stone, lanterns frozen in their hands, faces eroded into smooth masks. Some leaned at odd angles as though straining against invisible weight. Daniel waded closer. The water lapped against his thighs, icy, clinging. Beneath the surface, bones gleamed faintly. Too many to count. On the far wall, spirals had been carved into the rock, larger than the ones in Pike's journal. Their grooves still glistened as though freshly etched. His light lingered on one spiral, and his vision swam. For a split second, it wasn't a carving, it was an opening. A depthless hole, yawning outward into black. Something looked back from inside it. He staggered, nearly dropping the flashlight. The chamber answered with a voice. Not one voice, dozens layered together, deep and resonant, rising from the water, from the stone, from inside his chest. "Keeper." Daniel clutched his recorder. Voices present, multiple, origin unclear. They're calling me. The water rippled. One of the statues shifted, its head turned toward him, stone grinding like teeth. Then another, and another. Daniel backed away, but the chamber seemed to stretch with each step, the exit retreating farther. The voices grew louder, syllables strung together in a language older than the stones, yet threaded with his own name again and again. Daniel, Keeper, Keeper, Keeper. He clamped his hands over his ears, but the words weren't sound, they were thought. They filled his skull until he felt his own name slipping away, eroding like the statues' faces. From the spiral on the wall, light bled out. Not golden like the lantern room, but pale, cold, the light of the figures in the fog. It spread across the water, over the bones, up the statue's legs. One by one, the statues began to smile. Daniel's chest convulsed with terror. He turned and ran, boots sucking against the flooded floor, lungs burning with air that wasn't air at all but brine. The voices followed, swelling, promising, demanding. Keep, keep, keep. He scrambled up the ladder, slammed the hatch shut, collapsed against it. His body shook violently, as if the voices had crawled inside him and were trying to rattle their way out. The hum of the lantern roared above, stronger now, straining against something pressing up from below. He staggered back to the recorder, voice breaking. Act 5. Beneath the lighthouse. Chambers. Statues. Bones. The spirals are openings, not symbols. Openings. They're calling me Keeper. The light isn't guiding ships, it's holding something back. And it's failing. The floor vibrated. A deep, muffled roar rolled up through the stone, so powerful the walls quivered. From the hatch beneath him, a plume of cold air hissed, carrying a single word that wasn't a word, but he still understood. Soon. The tower quivered like a living thing trying to throw off a fever. Dust sifted from joints in the stone. The lantern above thrummed with a pitch that set Daniel's teeth on edge. He braced both palms on the keeper's desk and felt the vibration pass straight through the wood into his bones. He looked up. The stairwell had changed. It was the same iron spiral, the same enamel-scarred rail, but every shadow was one notch too dark, every turn one curve too steep, as if the geometry had thickened in the night. He lifted his camera, then set it back down. Filming wouldn't slow what was coming. He clicked on the recorder. 2:03 a.m. Containment failing. The beam from the lantern room didn't sweep now. It pressed, a steady column driving into the fog like a spike. The fog fought back. You could see it in the glass panes, a shimmer, a buckling, as if air itself was trying to shove the light away. With each pulse of pressure, the hum in the stone deepened, and the spiral seam along the keeper's floor gleamed with damp. The stairwell camera chimed, motion detected. Daniel turned the little screen and saw them, first as the absence of light on the lower flights, then as silhouettes resolving into men with lanterns, faces slightly wrong. They climbed without looking down, lanterns unlit, hands empty where the lanterns should be. One paused, lifted its face toward the lens. The features settled into Daniel's, then the old sailor's, then a blank, wet gleam, as if it had remembered no one fit and chose no face at all. He shut the feed off. He didn't want to see their faces become his. He didn't want to see what his face would do next. From the iron door at ground level came a slow, curious pressure. Not pounding, testing. The handle squeaked a quarter turn, stopped, squeaked back. Something on the other side learned the mechanism by touch. Not a beacon, Daniel whispered, as much to the room as the recorder. A lid. The lighthouse answered with a long, low crack from somewhere deep below. The hatch at the landing hissed a breath. Cold rose through the seam at the baseboards and pooled around his ankles like water, though the floor remained dry. He could taste the sea in it, kelp, iron, something older than salt. He had one plan left, and it was a bad one. He grabbed the journal, the logbook, and his recorder and climbed. The spiral tightened as he ascended. 3 turns, 5, 7, and the lantern room door stood before him, the glass on the other side beating with light. He hesitated at the threshold. The hum here was a living thing, not sound but pressure, like standing beside a vast throat while it sang. He stepped in. The lamp blazed at the lens's heart, impossibly clean, impossibly bright. No oil smell, no heat shimmer, just light, pure and hard, pouring itself into the night.
The Fresnel glass threw it out in 1,000 concentric teeth. Through the panes he saw the fog convulse, ripples moving across it like skin shivering. Below, the figures clustered at the base of the tower, heads tilted, as if listening to something inside the stones. With a motion both choreographed and wrong, they all lifted their empty hands toward the lantern room and held them there, palms out. "Keep," came the word, not spoken but imposed. His jaw ached with it. "Keep." Daniel set the journal on the sill and hit record. His voice came out calm, almost detached. 2:11 a.m. I'm in the lantern room. The light is autonomous. I don't think it's burning, I think it's binding. The entities below are... The glass to his right popped, spiderwebbing from a bullseye the size of a coin. He flinched back. Outside, the fog bulged against that pane as if a fingertip pushed from the other side. The crack ticked outward a hair. He moved to the control pedestal, a half-rusted frame of levers and gears, and laid his hand on a lever that should have lowered a wick that didn't exist. It vibrated under his palm, humming at the same note as the light. He tried anyway, hauling down with both hands. For a terrifying half-second the hum stuttered and dipped, and the fog outside smiled. Not with mouths, but with a great soft curve of motion. The relief of pressure eased. The figures below lifted their heads in unison. He shoved the lever back up. The light flared, furious. The smiles in the fog collapsed into a flat attention. "Right," he whispered, more to the light than himself. "Right. I get it. I get it." Something moved behind him. He turned and saw himself at the door. Not a mirror. There was no glass between them. Just Daniel. Rain-dark hair matted, shirt clinging with damp, eyes bright with fever. The other Daniel regarded the blazing lens with grim affection. He looked, Daniel realized, like a man seeing a familiar dog about to break its chain. "Keeper," the double said softly. The word felt like an old coat slipping over his shoulders. "Left foot first, lamp leftward, rounds underbreath." The old phrases from the journal, the superstitions that weren't. "Who are you?" Daniel asked. The other Daniel smiled with terrible kindness. "You. After you keep." He stepped sideways and was gone, not out the door, not down the stairs. Gone the way breath goes out of a body, leaving a shape for one long second, then none. Daniel stared at the empty doorway and laughed once, short and ragged. "No," he said to the room, to the light, to the seam in the floor below. "No." From below, the iron door finally committed. The handle turned all the way. The boom of the latch giving up its duty went through the tower like a bell struck. The first step inside sounded like a bare foot set gently on stone. Daniel dragged a steel tool chest against the lantern room door and wedged it under the knob. It was theater. If something could climb through fog and stone, a chest wouldn't slow it. But defiance has its own physics. He planted himself before the lens and put the recorder to his mouth. "If anyone finds this, listen." He swallowed. "The light is a seal. If it goes out, whatever's below comes up. The towns, the ships, the coast. It isn't warning them of rocks. It's caging what the sea breathes for. Do not..." He cut himself off and hissed as the shattered pane to his right cracked another inch. A draft slipped through, colder than any weather he'd known, and it carried a smell like a cellar you never built. "Do not relieve the keeper," he finished. "Not unless you're prepared to be kept." The floor jumped, not shook, jumped, as if struck from beneath by a single, wide palm. The light flared white-hot. The hum hit a new register that made his vision strobe. Down the spiral, the footfalls multiplied. There came a rain. Up the spiral, they paused, listening at intervals, the way men do when they know you're on the other side of the door and want you to hear them listening.
He did the only thing that made sense in a place where sense had different rules. He began the rounds. Left foot first, lamp leftward. He walked the circle of the lens, palm on the brass frame, speaking the boring language of keepers into the storm. Oil and wick and glass and grit. The liturgy of maintenance. The names of ships the journal had recorded. The dates of tides. He said them like prayers. He said them like locks clicking shut. With each pass, the light steadied. With each pass, the fog outside pressed harder, curdling against the beam, then smoothing, then pressing again. A pain to his left side, bulged, held. The seam in the floor below stopped gleaming and began to weep. "Keep," the stone begged in its voiceless way. "I'm keeping," he said, and realized he meant it.
Time narrowed. The rounds consumed it. The steps on the stairs synchronized with his own a counterpoint. Sometimes they preceded him by one, sometimes they lagged by one. Once, exactly in step, he saw a hand, his hand, mirror his palm on the brass, inches from his, separated by nothing. He did not look at its wrist to see if it ended in fog. When the failure came, it came small. The tool chest at the door scraped half an inch, though no hand touched it. The shattered pane lost a sliver of itself no wider than a fingernail. The hum in the light fluttered like a heart skipping the beat it needed. He put his weight into the rounds and the words and felt the tower lean with him, as if he were dancing with a drunk who had decided to fall now. "Hold," he said through his teeth, to the lamp, to the stones, to the version of himself that smiled at the idea of keeping forever. "Hold." The tower answered with a long subterranean groan, and then, like a mountain deciding, another jump from below. The spiral seam in the keeper's quarters split hairline to hairline. A breath came up that blew out papers, flipped the journal to its first page and made the flame that wasn't flame gutter. Daniel reached both hands into the light. There was nothing to grab. There was something to hold. He spoke, not words he knew, but shapes he'd learned reading Pike's frantic script. The spiral had a grammar. The lamp had a tongue. He borrowed both and pushed, not with muscle, but with the raw will that gets a body through a surf line when the undertow decides to keep you. The light took him, not into itself, into its work. The lens sang. The hum rose. The fog outside skinned away from the glass with a noise like wet cloth ripped clean. Below, something bellowed once, and the bellow cut off as if a door had shut on it mid-roar. Then silence. No knocks, no footfalls, no pressure at the stair. Only the sea, loud and ordinary, hitting rock the way seas have always hit rock. Daniel sagged against the frame and realized distantly that he was crying. The light still burned. It would burn so long as he asked it to, and he knew now that asking was keeping. He picked up the recorder one more time. 2:58 a.m., he whispered. Containment restored. For now. He set the recorder beside the journal, squared both like a man setting a place at her table, and took one last look through the panes. The fog thinned toward the horizon. Far to the south, a fishing boat cut a line across calmer water, unaware. The beam touched it. The boat altered course just a hair, the way captains do when they feel the old habit of trusting light. The lantern room door thumped once, softly, as if a polite guest had changed his mind and gone. Daniel smiled without meaning to. The smile felt like a vow and like surrender. He began another round. The beam of Graymark still cuts through the night, steady and unbroken, though no keeper has been seen entering or leaving in decades. Some say it's just the wind rattling old glass. Some say it's the sea playing tricks on the eye. But if you ask the locals, those who refuse to walk the cliffs after dark, they'll tell you the truth.
The light only burns when someone is inside, and someone is always inside. So the next time you're driving the coast and see a distant flare of light where no ships pass, don't stop to look closer. Don't listen for the knocks. And above all, don't answer if the lighthouse calls your name. If you enjoyed this journey into the haunted, the forgotten, and the cursed, help keep the fire burning here at Campfire Horror Stories. Hit the like button, share this story with friends who love the dark as much as you do, and subscribe with the bell on so you never miss another tale whispered from the shadows. Your support keeps the light alive and keeps us from becoming keepers ourselves.